everybody. Welcome back to the Extra Podcast. This is episode number 279. And my name is Paul Siemens, one of the pastors here at Northview. I'm glad to be here today, along with Greg Harris.
Hello.
Hey, Greg. And Andy Steiger.
Present.
And Pastor Jeff Bucknam.
How are you, Paul?
I'm doing well. How are you? Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It's been a hard week in the life of our city.
It sure has. As everybody knows who's listening to this, surely if you live in this area, there's been just an absolute shocking tragedy that happened here in Abbotsford last week with the stabbings at Abbotsford Senior High School and the death of Letitia Reimer. So obviously there's a lot of questions that people have when this kind of thing comes up, when we experience this. A lot of people, one of the first things I heard, guys, was this kind of thing doesn't happen in Canada. This happens in the States, right? Like these are things we hear about in Colorado and New York, and this doesn't come to BC. So we actually had a person send in a couple of questions into us about this, wondering about God's goodness amidst this kind of reality that we deal with.
Can I just suggest? I feel like there's like 10 or 15 things that I want to say theologically about this that I want to just start off. So I'm going to start, and then you guys jump into other things that you should say. Number one, this was wicked. I know that the temptation among Christians is to recognize that God uses all things together for good, especially for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose, Romans 8:28. I know this is a text. I believe it wholeheartedly. I think that's another thing we can say about this. It's not the first thing we say about it.
Right.
The first thing we say about this is it's wicked. The temptation that we all have is to look for the silver lining in God's providence.
Yeah.
And I don't want to rush there, because both the wickedness of the act and the providence of God over that wickedness, those are both true.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that this guy who did this acted wickedly, that judgment is good upon him.
Yes.
Both here, and if he does not repent, then the wicked, God will call it wicked, and He will hold him to account. So I want to say that. I want to follow it by saying, God is good all the time, even in moments like this, and it takes a long view of these matters in order to understand that. In the middle of it, it's next to impossible to see that, and I appeal to the psalmists for support in that. Don't you? I mean, you think about the psalmists and the way that they talk. There are moments the Psalms are just like, this is awful. Like, this is horrible. Where are you, God? Why have you left us alone? And they were dealing with issues, like the destruction of their people and the murder of thousands of people in this kind of wickedness. And they were trying to understand theologically how it is that God who had a covenant with them in many cases, or does have a covenant with them, but in many cases He let the people suffer under the hands of the Babylonians or the Assyrians or others, and the Babylonian, those foreign armies would come in and destroy them. And so these people who were called by God's name and had His covenant, and they were His treasured possession, were trying to make sense of, okay, how am I your treasured possession? How are we your treasured possession? And yet you have made it so that we are being destroyed. That doesn't make any sense. So you can understand, like in the existential moment, in that second, how difficult that was for them to make any sense of. So I want to say both of those. I want to affirm God's goodness, and that He includes in His good providence, for the sake of His people, even wicked acts of wicked men who seemingly do outrageous things, and yeah.
And it's because of God's goodness that we can condemn those actions as wicked.
Right. Without Him being good, without that standard, we can't say that this is wicked. This is the challenge. It was funny, the news media and stuff, that from a naturalist kind of worldview will come and they'll ask the questions of why, and behind that is why God, and you Christians, your God. And I want to respond actually quite forcefully and say, your worldview has no answers here. Stop accusing Christians who believe in a God who might have reasons for allowing something like this that he's not told you about. But in the long run, his wisdom will be proved good and true. Stop accusing Christians who believe that of having some dumb belief when you don't believe in even the idea of wickedness. You have no claim on it. All you have is some cultural notion that we've come up with. But if in 20 years we decide that stabbing is okay, I guess we'll all have to go with it, right? So again, the Christian worldview is the place to go on a moment like this.
And instead of fleeing from God and saying, God, you don't exist, or God, you're awful or evil, it's as the psalmist goes before God and just cries out his heart. And that's the beauty of, in Christianity, that it's a relational God that we serve and love, and that we are in relationship with as we pour out our heart and share our frustration of an evil and broken world.
Right.
I also think it's helpful to remember I love the first few chapters of Job when his friends are actually good and helpful, when they just sit with Job and they're hesitant to give answers. I think that there are good answers to give, and there are seasons and times where we need to prepare to give that answer. But sometimes we're tempted to give that answer so quickly in an attempt to make ourselves feel better or to work it out in our own head, whereas the reality of our situation is that there are dozens and hundreds of people right thick in the midst of shock and grief and not actually knowing what to do. And I think the first answer for a Christian is the answer of a closed mouth and a present person sitting with them in the midst of it and just agreeing with them that life is hard and this is not how it should be, and this was horrific, and grief isn't anti-Christian. Sorrow and lamenting over wickedness isn't a lack of faith in God's goodness. He's big enough to take our frustrations and our anger at the presence of wickedness. He's not going to cut us off from salvation.
He has that frustration. God does. We share in the frustration of God and the anger of God when we decry it. I do think that there are two levels of this. One is the personal level, the level of the families who are affected by it, the community that's affected by it, who's actually, personally grieving. And then there's the second level, which is maybe I'll call it the apologetic level, which is, okay, this arises in us, all sorts of questions about who God is, what he's like, whether he exists, this sort of thing. And that theological level just needs to be, at least in the discussions that we're having, separated a little bit from the personal level. There are places, especially on a podcast like this, we're going to talk more about the theological apologetic level. But our hope is that the personal level, that there are people who are sitting by them and aren't quick to trying to answer every question all the time. Sometimes the questions are there. They are. They're genuinely there.
And the answer, even good, grounded, theological, true answers, don't erase the existential crisis. Don't erase the heartache. And we can't, I don't think it's fair to look at the answers to erase the heartache. We have to recognize that just because we have a good answer that's true doesn't mean now the emotion's gone.
Yeah. Right. Paul, it's interesting that you brought that at the very beginning. What was it that you said that I'm sorry, I'm struggling to remember exactly what you said at the beginning. Maybe there's a dead end.
How does the reality of evil and God's goodness interact? Is that what you're thinking about?
No, it was about how some people were.
Oh, yes. So people were saying that they're surprised that this happened here in Abbotsford, in Canada.
I think that this reveals a weakness in perhaps Canadian, the Canadian mentality, and that is that there is it. Okay, I'm an American, half Canadian saying this, right? Mom's Canadian, so I guess I'm Canadian, and I'm going to say that one of the things I have noticed about here is that there is a looking down one's nose at the moral depravity of America from here.
Very true.
And there tends to be we're more civilized type of people. And it's interesting that somebody would make that statement, because I think we all need to come to realize that within the hearts of people, there exists the propensity to kill. Now, we are restrained. So I'm talking theologically now. We are restrained by so many factors in our society. And by that, I mean we have our own personal restraints in the sense that we want the people around us to value us. We've been maybe brought up in a family that has some that's healthy and that has given us some sort of moral compass, or at least affirmed this moral compass. We have the law and our fear of going to jail. We have just a myriad of just societal reasons why it is that we wouldn't go and kill somebody else. But when Jesus comes in, he says, if you have anger in your heart toward your brother, what he's appealing to there is, look, if all of those societal restraints were removed and all of those influences were taken away, the truth is, if you could get away with it and it could achieve your purposes, inside of you is the potentiality. Because you're a sinner. Inside of you is this desire to get your way and to manipulate the circumstances. And if you're not restrained, you would kill in certain circumstances. And that's wicked. Okay? And I listen, there's all sorts of caveats I want to make there and nuances and stuff. Not everybody is going to be somebody's going to walk in and do this. This is wicked. It's ridiculous. It's awful. I'm saying that within the hearts of people, Canadians, Americans, everyone, everywhere, there exists this drive, this thing, and that actually what we should be pointing to and crying out against is sin in our members, to use the language that Paul has in Romans 7. We should be crying out against this.
Isn't that the challenge, though, is we don't see the evil, the sin in people's lives. And in fact, we have this idea that people are basically good. Yep. And I think it's perpetuated, particularly here in Canada and elsewhere, where we live in relative safety, right? And we've have enough historical distance from those horrible events of the past, right, to start to think highly upon yourself again. And then something like this happens, and you're like, "What?" And you're confused.
Yeah, and it's crazy when it happens in suburbia. I mean, which is what this is. And it's a suburban crime at this point. And that's what it shocks suburban people, because the suburbs exist to preserve us from this very thing. Yeah. Right? I don't live in the Lower East Side of Vancouver for this very reason, because people get stabbed there. And my kids might go to school and get hurt there. And so we have, in many cases, unwittingly and unintentionally, But we bought into the cultural value that, look, I want to move out of the city into a place where I can have a yard and a fence, where I can drive my car into open an electronic door and shut it behind me, have locks on my doors, and for the most part have neighbors who I all know, who often look like me and act like me and go to church like me. It's all very controlled. Suburbia is a controlled environment, and then something like this happens, and it's a bigger shock here than it is in those other places, because everything around us is built. Suburbia is built to convince you that maybe utopia is real, that maybe we can get there if we just organize things right.
Do you know what's interesting? Something I've been thinking about when I was in England and just seeing all the castles, seeing the moats and the walls. You're reminded that it wasn't very long ago that you didn't live in suburbs. You lived actually behind walls, and you lived behind gates, and you did different, you had to make sure that you were protecting yourself because there was you understood that people were wicked and that people would act out on their wickedness. And so there was, there's this need, to separate yourself from people. And I'm glad that we don't have, walls, and I don't have to live in a castle, and I don't have to make a moat or whatnot. But it's easy then to forget just how broken the world is.
Well, that's my point, is everything around us in the suburbs is trying to convince us that we're not actually as depraved as we are. We've organized the depravity out of us, right? We've created structures and systems and eliminated the bad parts, and at least in our minds, those are urban things. The suburbs are different, right? You get this. Actually, I've lived in small towns. You get this in small towns. That's why in small town America, for example, if some crime like this happens, it's absolutely shocking on a level that people don't know. Something like this happens in Linden. It's crazy, and there have been murders that have happened in Linden, Washington, just across the border, and it has shocked the entire community on levels that they don't know what to do with. And I'm saying all of that because I think that we need to recognize that we live in a fallen world, and there's no. Andy was talking about technology this morning, and some of the ways that we in the modern world are using technology to try to bring about some kind of utopia by the implementation of technological advancements and things like that to try to bring about eternal kind of life for us. And I'm saying that will never work. It won't work because none of it deals with the real issue, which is sin in us. And we will always use our technology. We'll use knives and guns and that sort of thing for our own purposes. And our purposes often are our own advantage or revenge or all sorts of things that you can't utopianize. It's not a word. You can't suburbanize out of us.
It's interesting. Plato thought in his Republic, if we could just get people smart enough, if we could just have enough philosophers, then we could, usher in, it was an education problem.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems like it's just a technology problem, right?
Right.
We're always,
Right.
trying to push this off. I think it is important, though, to mention here at Northview on Sunday, we prayed for these families, prayed for South Abbotsford Church, where I believe some of them attend, prayed for the students that are heading back to school that are dealing with this. I think this is one of the things that, this is one of the things I love about Christianity, is that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we want to lift each other up, and that as a pastoral staff today, we prayed for the students at South Abbotsford. We prayed for these families that were involved, for the Reimer family in particular, and this girl who I believe is still in the hospital. Our prayers are with them, and it's neat to hear about how the church is rallying behind these families, and is being light in this darkness.
It's actually wonderful. I'll even go one step further, which again has all sorts of theological import for me. I think it's really cool when you see. So on the one hand, I'm like, we're talking about the depravity in the people, right? There's this inside of us, this thing, this impulse to kill and to destroy and to want our own thing, and yet around us also you see this overwhelming sense of goodwill by Christian and believer and unbeliever alike. People baking cookies for people at Abbey Senior, people giving money to GoFundMe accounts, people sacrificing themselves because they want to help, from Christians and non. And this is such a great example of the weirdness, mixed up nature of humanity, in that we are image bearers of God, and yet totally warped and capable of the worst things.
Right, we're like funhouse mirrors, right? Isn't that kind of the image, or broken mirrors, like mirrors that are full of cracks and broken, and you look and you see some semblance of the image of God, but there's also this complete brokenness that sin has caused.
And we can get to the point where we overemphasize one at the expense of the other.
Absolutely.
And that's a danger, that there's this tension that exists in people, that we want to affirm the goodness that you see when communities respond, but also recognize our sin inside of us is the sin inside of me is the same as the sin inside of the guy who did this. That doesn't excuse him, right? It's as wicked in me as it is in him. He acted out on it, which is even more wicked. So, as Christians, we're in this weird, tense place because we recognize ourselves in the killer. We recognize ourselves in the victim, and we want to. We have the beauty of the Christian worldview is it has theological categories for all of these things, true biblical categories to describe the world in which we inhabit right now, which is kind of my approach to answering this question as a whole. That you don't want to run away from the Christian doctrine here. Right. You want to embrace it at every turn, because if you really understand the way the Bible talks, it's giving you all sorts of therapeutic help in moments like this.
The other thing that I found moving this weekend, I was in the Saturday night service, and Darcy was praying about the situation, and he prayed for the gentleman who committed the crime, and he prayed for repentance and for transformation, and I was just hit anew with God's grace that none of us deserve it. That guy doesn't deserve it. He deserves justice, and yet God, we pray in His mercy will open this man's heart so he can receive forgiveness and grace.
Yeah, when Darcy prayed that, I was thinking about the Apostle Paul.
Yeah,
right. Who basically, he wasn't the one who was driving the knife necessarily. He was providing the stones.
Yeah,
right, and he was holding the coats, and he was holding the
when Stephen got martyred,
and he was carrying the orders.
Yes,
when this happened. So what you have in the Apostle Paul is a man who fits the description of wicked. A wicked, and yet we see him as a hero,
right? Yeah,
and so the grace of God extends to even those, and the challenge for those of us who've grown up in the church or who've have been the beneficiaries of a really good upbringing, Christianized upbringing, whether we were in the church or in societies that were heavily influenced by the Christian worldview, is that we don't sometimes see ourselves in this, and yet we should see ourselves in this as what we are broken image bearers.
Yeah. The just thinking about how the community could respond to the killer and the killer's family. It sounds like his family's not from around here or whatever, but it reminds me of the murder that was that gentleman went into or that man went into a school, an Amish school. It was about a decade ago, probably now.
No, not even that.
Wasn't that long ago?
5 years, maybe.
Okay,
yeah.
and he killed all those kids and a teacher, I think, and then killed himself. And all the reports out of that were awful and everything. But then the media kind of left it. And when we went through the Amish country, I have a cousin who lives out there, and we went, and he gave us kind of a tour around, and he talked about that, and he talked about how the community there, the Amish community, just offered forgiveness to that family. And actually, this man, he had a wife and kids who weren't able to care for themselves anymore. Now they weren't able to pay a mortgage, they weren't able to buy their groceries or anything, and the Amish community came around and started paying her mortgage and started buying her groceries. And this woman was just couldn't believe the kindness that she was receiving from these people who were professing faith,
which is
Christ.
A great story. So, and yet there's, I mean, in this moment, I keep wanting to reaffirm the very thing I said at the beginning.
Yeah,
it's wicked. He was wicked.
Oh,
and so there's this tension that we're holding together by saying, we are trying to care for the wicked and the innocent in this situation. And it's been a very sad week with lots of people who are friends who've been first responders, and others, I've talked to I don't know how many different people who've had different kind of views on the event itself. And so we continue to pray, and I'm sure you are listening or continue to join us. It's in prayer for not just the school, especially South Abbotsford Church, as they're shepherding their people through this, and the people who knew his family, and youth groups and that. And so if it would be great if maybe you put a dot on your watch. Do we use watches anymore? I don't know. If you put something somewhere, just remind yourself to pray for these folks continually. And because, what happens in the news cycle is this is the hot subject for now. Yeah. But then the difficult work is that it sort of passes over. And then we move on to the next hot thing, which is probably the election in the States, which is happening today. Yeah. And I'm going to win.
I voted for Jeff, by the way.
Yeah. A lot of people giving write-ins for Dr. JB.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, definitely keep praying for those in our town, those at Abbey, and especially for the families and for South Abbotsford Church. Okay, I think probably transition to another question.
As awkward as it might be, it's difficult to transition from that subject at all. But
so our culture, seeing this kind of a thing, we actually have like what a lot of guys have called the culture of death, because of the way our culture has just rampant like abortion, the euthanasia issue coming up, or assisted suicide, and the obsession with things such as zombies. So it's an interesting thing how we have this culture that just totally obsesses over death, and yet when we get to hard times like this, they kind of also want to kind of gloss over it too. They don't really want to talk about the hard things.
I mean, and we just had Halloween too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Andy, you've talked a lot about zombie culture and how we have this culture. I guess that's kind of your name for the culture of death, right?
Yeah,
The zombie culture.
Did you patent that
I did.
that name?
I'm sure somebody
Is
else
there a
has
little
used
R
it too.
with a circle
but-
beside it?
Yeah.
Registered trademark. Andy Steiger.
I did come up with zombie culture, though. Actually, a friend of mine and I had in a conversation came up with it. Anyway, what was
It
the
was
question?
his friend.
So it was
It was his
actually-
friend's idea.
It was actually his idea, but you decided to take in.
But you're on a mic right now.
Yeah, that's
and you're going to write a book about it.
So somebody recently watched your teachings on zombie culture. Apparently you have a 4-part series on this.
we did it with our young adults a couple last year
Okay.
or 2 years ago.
Is this online somewhere that people
I
can get
guess
it?
so.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Google.
Anyway, somebody
It's
watched
on
it.
Google.
Yeah. I
And,
think everything's on Google.
Yeah, good.
And one of our listeners watched it, and she sent in a question. She's wondering, here it is, as a Christian, do you think it's wrong for us to dress up like zombies? Is it wrong for us to watch things like The Walking Dead? Since you shared with such passion on how our zombie culture is opposed to who God is and what he values for us, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm thinking, too, that the person wrote that in because I went to a zombie walk. Is that true?
Did you
That
go to?
isn't referenced.
Oh, that's not referenced in
here?
there?
Oh, wait, hold on. You went to a zombie walk.
I did. I went to the Vancouver 10th annual zombie walk. And it was very
10th annual.
Yeah, so that was a couple years ago. So I think they're into their 12th or 13th now. That was very interesting. I went down there with, instead of a Subway shirt that says Subway Eat Fresh, it said Zombies Eat Flesh. I went down there with that shirt on with my intern, and we ran from zombies.
It's like a Christian shirt.
Yeah.
That's what Christians have done for years. Budweiser up.
And we interviewed zombie walkers to ask them why they did it and what they were thinking.
Was their response mostly
brains? Yeah. Well, and then I asked this one zombie if zombies poop, and he started busting up laughing.
Oh, so you broke character
So
for him.
I did. I knew how to do it. That's how you do it. At any rate, is it wrong for a Christian to dress up as a zombie? One thing that always goes through my mind, and this is actually something that we talk a lot about here at Northview, is one thing is not to take yourself too seriously. Because sometimes I think that, you could ask the question, I mean, should you be able to dress up as anything, Should you dress up, should your daughter dress up as a princess? Should your son dress up as a pirate or, whatever that might be?
Yeah. You're not celebrating piracy when your son dressed up like a pirate, I don't think. I don't know if people are celebrating zombiness and saying, this is a great thing. I hope that I come back as the living dead.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. Because, I mean, if we think about it, I watch pirate movies and my kids dress up as pirates. But pirates are truly terrible people if you think about it.
Yeah.
the worst kinds of people.
Yeah, they're awful. But you're right. I agree with
Especially
you. I don't
Jake
think that we're celebrating
and the Neverland
zombies
Pirates.
in that.
They're the
Now,
worst.
some people, though, when they dress up as zombies, I think that they are celebrating zombies. And some of these zombies things are truly grotesque.
Yeah.
Right? With flesh hanging off and all the rest. But then there's others that are, like, if you ever watch the very first zombie movie, it's called White Zombie. I mean, these zombies just...
The first zombie movie?
Yeah.
You just threw that out like everybody knew it.
Okay, it's called White Zombie, first zombie movie.
When did it come out?
It came out in 1935, I believe.
Wow.
That would have freaked people out.
It did, but all they were is these bug-eyed people that looked really goofy. And now you would have no trouble dressing up as one of those zombies. But today's Walking Dead zombies are pretty scary looking beasts. So, I'm gonna throw it out. No, I would love to hear what you
What's
guys
your
have to
answer?
say. This.
Your
My
answer is-
answer is this: I think that as a Christian, you can figure that one out for yourself. What is an appropriate line?
It's a Christian freedom issue for you.
It is.
The zombie dressing? Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. But
What was the
So
other
what
question?
about, can you watch things like The Walking Dead? So now, yeah, I think you'd probably say the same thing. This is still a Christian freedom issue.
It is.
But then we can get to the idea of if it's permissible, is it actually beneficial?
Yeah.
Now, here's what
Is it wise?
Is it
those
wise?
are the questions that you'd want to ask. But
Yeah.
again, those are questions that's the answer to that question is going to be one that's going to be answered by
Right.
the person before
Yeah.
God, not so much for me saying, well, I don't think that's beneficial for you, Greg, you eating that Purdy's chocolate, which, by the way, was given to us.
Yeah, a few episodes we talked about our favorite chocolates. I said Purdy's coconut cluster, and then someone came up to me with a bag of like 30 coconut clusters.
And he brought in the bag today,
And they're
which did
delicious.
not have 30 in it.
No, it had a solid 12.
I think it had less than that, Greg.
Guys, it was like a minimum of 9.
Greg?
At least 7.
Oh, I had one, Greg, and there's 3 left.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I had one too, and they're delicious.
We want to thank the person who gave that to
Yes,
us.
thank
though.
you.
And we want to remind all of you that any kind of food, delectable food, we are happy to give, and you will get a shout out. If you want your name or your business to be added to our thing, we are absolutely interested in that.
It's been a
All
while
right,
since.
I'm gonna jump back from the chocolate back into the zombie thing though.
Okay.
Do zombies like this
before
sort
that
of thing?
tangent goes on and on? Because I do think that there's something important here. One is I think this might be interesting in that I've never been like a guy who likes watching, say, war movies or anything like that. I'm actually very conservative on what kind of movies I will watch and won't watch. The Walking Dead is a show that I do watch unashamedly. There have been moments that in the show that I've thought, you know what, if this keeps going down this path, say, there was one episode where it looked like rape was going to be a part of the show, and I was going to say,
we're not
okay,
doing
I'm done. But it ended up not going down that path. However, I've heard lots about season 7. I haven't watched season 7. I'm one of those Netflix watchers that waits until it's free. It sounds to me like I actually might be done with The Walking Dead. But one of the things that I want to say that I think people need to hear more of is that, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this, but I would argue that Christians by and large are too sheltered, and that some people need to actually watch some of these shows in that. One of the things I've loved about this show is it's reminded me once again of the depravity of man. I mean, I can't help but think about the kind of stuff that's in The Walking Dead pales in comparison to anything you read in the Old Testament.
Okay, so I'm gonna challenge you a little bit.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Only for the sake of the discussion. Is it wrong to be sheltered?
I would see, now that's a great question that I've been thinking about, and I would argue that yes, it is wrong to be sheltered in that I can't help but wonder if we've got a culture that has lost sight of the depravity of man. It isn't a culture that's not convinced that people are wicked, and I can't help but wonder though, to push back, if that's not why we make so many World War II movies as a way to remind ourselves that what happened in the past was wicked and we don't want it to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I think that we just talked the last little while about living in the suburbs and that sort of thing. I think that the impulse and desire for us to shield ourselves from the display of sin or these sorts of things is not a bad impulse. I think it's something that we should honor in people. So I don't ever want to be the person who says, you need to get out there more. I think it's okay if you're not out there more. I do think if you are going to go out there, I'm also going to add, man, you really need to put on your discernment headset when you engage with the culture these days. That you need to be well versed in Scripture and the biblical worldview at risk, because if you don't, you're going to end up becoming a syncretist and just merging Christian doctrine with the cultural values at this place. But I tend to agree with you that I think there is a sense in which suburban people at times need to be broken out of some of their suburban mindsets.
And I think you're doing a good job nuancing what I'm saying here, because I am saying it to be a little bit more to make it controversial. But I just think about movies like a World War I movie or a World War II or a Vietnam movie. I mean, I'm not a war movie guy, but don't you think one of the points of history is to remind us so that we don't go back?
Yeah, and I think one of the temptations, unfortunately, is that when we watch a World War II movie, they're always directed by one particular side of the equation, and we end up saying, well, those Germans were just dumb or evil. We're not like them. And I think that even that movie tends to reinforce that as opposed to challenge it. There are some films. In fact, maybe I don't know them. There aren't a lot of movies that are made these days that actually try to argue for the wickedness, say, of the Allies in World War II. Even saying that out loud might bring a shock or frustration to someone who's listening. Like, why would we ever do that? They're Nazis, which of course they're wicked and they should be decried. The Allies were never. They're not white as the driven snow either.
Right. So you've got Tarantino making that film about this team of people that are going out to hunt Nazis.
Yeah.
Right. And you've got people cheering. Oh yeah, that's awesome. They're just going to kill a bunch of Nazis, and it's like.
See, now, I would never argue for something like that. Like, I don't think you should go. I'm not going to say, hey, you should go see those kind of movies. Right? Because I guess one of my fears in doing a talk like this or speaking on the subject is people are going to put movies. They're going to imagine that I'm arguing for movies that I'm not arguing for.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because now to balance this though, and I know I've interrupted you here, but I think you have to read your history at the same time too. I mean, you can't just go watching movies and imagine that's going to be good history. Sorry, you were saying, Paul.
No, that's fine. The whole thing about this, having this kind of, self-righteous ness to it, like, oh, I'm gonna go watch and see all these. It's okay for all these Nazis to get killed because they're so bad and they're so wicked and they're so evil, and that's not excusing what they did. It's not excusing at all the philosophy behind Hitler and the Nazis.
By the way, is that what
they did?
Is that a bad impulse?
What?
To want to see justice brought. See, no, I think it is a good impulse.
Yes.
The problem is we exempt ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And that's just it.
We think the Allies are not exempted from from the judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, by the way, what you're saying. In reading history, you see that countries like the UK started adopting different policies, such as with regards to different communist policies during World War II that, nobody's talking about that. And it ended up not, some of them, people started fighting back on these things, but it's not like everybody's hands were clean in all this. I mean, even eugenics got its start in the West with the United States. Right. Germany was inspired by America.
Right. I mean, you had Jews wanting to leave Germany because of what was happening, and countries, allied countries, refusing to accept them as refugees
because they're Jews.
Yeah,
that's the reason that they gave, which is like,
but
I don't know.
Here's my point, though. If I can bring it back to the Bible, how many people though avoid books like Joshua, Judges?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right because they're offended by some of what's written in there, and I think that's my point here is that where I'm agreeing with you. I think that you can become, to bring it back to the suburban thing, you can become so addicted to utopia and that's the idea that I don't want my children to ever hear about bad things that happen. Well, man, you're just not reading the Bible then. Or you think it's a bunch of stories about Narnia. And it didn't actually happen. That when the Canaanites were killed with all their oxen and children, you don't think that actually was the Canaanites and that children were involved. Like, these are things in the scriptures that one needs to take seriously and understand, and that might maybe cause some theological challenges for us or whatever. But I agree with you that if that's what you mean by you need to get out more, that you can cloister yourself in this little family-olatrous bubble, right? Which is like, I know what's best for my family to know, and it's to never see a dead body and to never be like troubled, and my helicopter parent my kids so that if they fall in the playground, I'm right there. That kind of approach to things actually will end up hurting them in the long run, and perhaps there are a lot of people out there who are like that. And in that case, I would say you need to get out more. I don't know if the best way to do it is watch The Walking Dead, but
no.
but
right.
Yep, I can appreciate that, and discretion is needed.
Yeah.
But so people need to hear from me too, like, because I think people think, oh man, Andy must just watch anything.
Dude,
no, I actually have a really high standard of what I will or won't watch. But I do agree with what you're saying, Jeff. I think some people, though, they get wooed into this utopian idea, and then they have all sorts of questions about God's goodness and whether or not people really are that bad.
Especially in the face of terror or, the kinds of things that have been happening in the last while. That these sorts of things set us up for difficult moments in our minds and create, we end up rejecting God because we were never actually well acquainted with the whole biblical story.
Yeah.
Oh, and if I could just make one last comment on this.
Yeah.
There is a difference, too, between entertainment and thought-provoking content, where a movie or TV show is wanting to raise a cultural issue for people to think about. And you have to remember, though, that author or that director, they have their own worldview. They have their own perspective that they're trying to convince you of.
Yep.
And so I think you need to go into these things, whether or not you're reading something or watching something, as an active participant, as you're engaging with the content.
Absolutely.
That's for sure. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your input today. Thank you for taking the time to come and do this. To our listeners out there, please continue to send in your questions. The email is extra@northview.org. And so go this week, be blessed, and continue to pray for our loved ones in this town, and come quickly, Lord Jesus.
Amen.